and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered nonprofit media broadcast coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. We act as the media wing of the Arakan Rohingya Union, providing exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and the latest news from reputable sources from around the world. We'd like to ask you to take a moment and go to www.vorradio.org for up-to-date news and information concerning this program and how you can get involved. Voice of Rohingya Radio is the only news source of its kind in the English-speaking world. You can learn more about the Rohingya cause by supporting us today, and we'll continue bringing you the latest news in a convenient format and keeping you informed and involved. You can listen to our program each week, Sundays at 7 p.m. Pacific Time, and if you're interested in sponsoring our program, simply log on to our website or send us an email to support@vorradio.org. It is February 22nd, 2015. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. In our top story tonight, what little citizenship documentation is held by Rohingyas is now on the chopping block. At the beginning of February, the Rohingya population of Arakan had the impression that something good might come for the future after the Myanmar president had announced plans to issue nationality cards to Muslims in place of existing temporary white cards, according to one of our sources inside the Myanmar border. But soon hopes for a genuine nationality card faded after conflicting and twisted clarifications by high-ranking immigration officers were outed. Now Rohingyas of Arakan are to face the same fate of Bangladesization and forced acceptance of naturalized citizenship cards. Our source said the dream of getting genuine national scrutiny cards has faded and an uncertain future has yet again gripped the community. Mistrust and apprehension are widespread among Rohingyas about the entire process. The president of Myanmar has announced plans to nullify white cards with nationality cards issued in their place. All white cards would be collected by the 31st of May. Every day, Rohingyas are making photocopies of their white cards to keep in hand if the cards will have to be surrendered within the prescribed period. All of the younger generation of Rohingyas have this card, but a few of their parents and grandparents hold national registration cards and white cards simultaneously or only white cards. If white cards are to be surrendered, only some older generation Rohingyas will have the national registration cards in hand. Our source says that if the plan goes through, most Rohingyas will be without documentation, and without registration cards, lives will be in great peril. Trade, travel, marriage, education, and other daily activities will be much affected, so no one is ready to surrender the cards before getting the proposed nationality cards. Our source added that Rohingya fear that when one is without a card, they will be compelled to accept any kind of card issued to them, so it is necessary that first a new card is to be issued before giving up the white cards. Our source concluded that all Rohingyas are unanimous on this stand. For more on the citizenship card issue, we go now to Executive Director for the U.S. Campaign for Burma, Simon Billiness. Mr. Billenness, how are you today?
I am fine.
Could you describe for me how you got involved in Rohingya issues?
I've been working on human rights and democracy and social justice in Burma for over 20 years now.
So, Simon, I'd like to detail this political ping-pong played by the Myanmar government concerning these citizenship cards. A parliament member of the National League for Democracy recently tabled a motion in Parliament to deny white card voting rights in the referendum. Parliament approved it by a large majority and sent it to the president for his signature, but subsequently the president, Thein Sein, sent the bill back to the parliament with a comment that white card holders would be allowed to vote in the referendum. Then Parliament approved the bill with a large majority and the president signed it into law. A few days later, however, the president signed a decree declaring that white cards will not be valid after the 31st of March and must be surrendered by the 31st of May. The following day, Rakhine Parliament members, together with the help of some of the members of the NLD, sent the law to the Constitutional Tribunal to clarify whether the bill violates the Constitution. The tribunal nullified it, saying that it did in fact violate the Constitution. Do you feel this event was pre-planned from the beginning?
Well, I think it is wise to assume that a lot of what the Burmese regime is doing in terms of discrimination against the Rohingya is pre-planned. What you have here is what is ostensibly still pretty much a military regime that's desperately seeking any way to build up its legitimacy and to distract people from It's trying to stack the elections, and from its continuing domination of the economy through its crony businessmen, and we're seeing in the growing restrictions on the Rohingya is the regime seeking to curry favor with this sort of nationalistic, anti-Muslim tendency and prejudice within Burmese society, and use that to distract people away from forms of resistance against the regime. For instance, the growing student demonstrations for educational reform. I'm never surprised when I see restrictive measures being enacted on the Rohingya and violence against the Rohingya. Oftentimes promoted by the regime, because these things often occur, funnily enough, when there's growing popular support and organizing around economic issues and around fully democratic elections and so forth. So, yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing in terms of repression of the Rohingya is planned by the regime to desperately seek support and to distract people.
For more than 2 years now, thousands of Rohingya have been living in IDP camps, and those who aren't in IDP camps are essentially living in open-air prisons, with pretty much every aspect of their life severely restricted. The extortion, false allegations, harassment, imprisonment of Rohingya people in Arakan by local Buddhist authorities and the so-called border guard police is beyond reprehensible. As an advocacy group like your U.S. Campaign for Burma, what do you think the future holds for these issues?
We are a human rights organization, and so the discrimination and denial of basic rights of the Rohingya in Burma is definitely the most egregious discrimination and oppression that we see against any ethnic minority in Burma. And that's saying quite a lot, given the extent to which the regime has discriminated against and is still, in many cases, waging war against different ethnic minorities in Burma. So what I expect to see is, particularly in the lead up to the elections that are expected in November of this year, I expect to see a lot more efforts by the regime to deny the Rohingya their basic rights and to use that to, curry favor with this sort of nationalistic constituency in Burma, which seems to be the regime's, only possible source of any kind of significant support.
So, Simon, what would be your advice to the Obama administration concerning Burmese policy?
Our advice to the Obama administration has been very clear, and that is to highlight the fact and underscore the fact that the regime, both on human rights and on restoring democracy, has been backsliding ever since 2012, when the U.S. largely dropped and suspended its sanctions on Burma. And, I think we were very successful working with a number of other groups, including many Rohingya rights organizations, to, before President Obama went to Burma in November of last year, to make it very clear that he needed to signal that the regime was backsliding on reforms, and that if President Obama wanted Burma to be a foreign policy success, that the U.S. administration needed to put a lot more effective pressure on the Burmese regime to properly reform. So, we've seen some good rhetoric and language from the U.S. administration. I think we've seen a lot better language from the U.S. administration, as we've seen from the European Union and the UK government in particular. But the U.S. administration needs to back up its words with some effective actions. Putting more, political and economic pressure on the Burmese regime and their business backers would be very good, and also particularly on any member of the regime that can be linked to violence and discrimination against the Rohingya and against other ethnic minorities in Burma.
Now, Mr. Billenness, do you think the U.S. government would reconsider bringing back sanctions, and do you think that would help the issue?
Yeah, because I think it's quite clear that sanctions do have a clear effect on the Burmese regime. That was, and it's notable that since sanctions were dropped and suspended, the regime has backslid, and so would be looking to press the U.S. administration to unsuspend or add some existing targeted restrictions and sanctions on the regime, to make it very clear that the U.S. will back up with effective pressure what it's demanding the regime to do.
Simon, that's all I have for you today. Did you want to offer any closing remarks?
Well, I think I actually want to express my thanks and appreciation to you and everyone else who have been clear and active in highlighting and being active in support of the Rohingya in Burma. And I think it's important to realize that this repression of the Rohingya is the most egregious example of how the regime, the still essentially a military regime in Burma, is using every means available to it to try and retain power. The repression of the Rohingya is designed and planned to be a distraction from the regime's efforts to stay in power. And it's important to understand that as a means of figuring out how we can stop the regime and make it very clear that there's a very high price it will have to pay if it continues with this repression of the Rohingya.
Mr. Billenness, thanks for your kind words, and thank you again for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Once again, that was Simon Billiness, Executive Director of U.S. Campaign for Burma. You were listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Welcome back to Voice of Rohingya Radio. We recently had the pleasure of speaking with Joe Grabowski out of Washington, D.C. Joe, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. I've been very proud to be a member of the Board of Advisors of the Arakan Rohingya Union since July of 2013. And also, we've been working very closely with ARU here in Washington, D.C. on advancing Rohingya issues, both with the U.S. government and with the United States Congress.
Joe, it's been a couple of years now since you've been involved with Rohingya affairs. From your perspective, how much improvement have you noticed since your involvement?
I'm very proud to say that we've seen a greater increase in information and knowledge of the situation. The president made reference to the issue at the National Prayer Breakfast. There's been mention of it in the U.S. Congress. We're very proud of our involvement with the passage of the unanimous passage of a resolution in the U.S. House. And so, at the very least, the more number of people that are aware, the more people that are following what's happening, the more people we have to engage to advocate on behalf of the Rohingya.
Now, I know you've been instrumental in helping U.S. House Resolution 418 pass in the House of Representatives. There was another similar resolution on the table in the Senate. Can you update us about the status of that resolution? How does it differ from H.R. 418?
Well, the original bill that was in the Senate unfortunately didn't make it through before the end of the last Congress, and so there's been movement to have the resolution reintroduced in the Senate this time around. The language that was introduced the last time is actually even a little bit stronger than the House language was. The Senate language was much more direct at making sure that the United States government be very direct and very clear with the Burmese government that issues related to citizenship and issues related to property and other areas that are of significant importance to the Rohingya be dealt with by the Burmese government. The Senate was very, very strong in that language.
Mr. Grabowski, Voice of Rohingya Radio is planning to expand its broadcast to include live reports from on the ground, photography of the situation in Myanmar, and important dialogue about the cultural and historical contributions of Burmese Rohingya. What are your thoughts on why it's important for companies and organizations to support Voice of Rohingya Radio in this effort?
VOR is one of the unique voices on behalf of the Rohingya that can, with objectivity and with accuracy, report on the situation on the ground. And we relied on the work of VOR when we were advocating on the Hill, because without that firsthand knowledge, without that objective information, it's impossible to really push the issue the right way. And thankfully, your work has been able to give us the tools necessary to do that.
Thank you for that. Mr. Grabowski, that's all the time I have for you today. Did you want to offer any closing thoughts?
One of the things that I'd just like to add is that we can't let the Rohingya issue become a secondary issue. That we need to make sure that those people who listen to your broadcast understand that they do have a voice, but that voice needs to be continually going. And so whether resolutions exist in the House or Senate or not, it's important for their members of Congress to stay engaged. It's important for their members of Congress to hear about this issue. And so I encourage your listeners just to call their congressional offices or email them and say, there's this terrible situation happening to this community in Burma. What are you doing about it?
Well said. Mr. Grabowski, thank you so much again for coming on the program. Hope to talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much.
Once again, that was Joe Grabowski, who works on the Board of Advisors for the Arakan Rohingya Union. And on the topic of the Arakan Rohingya Union, the Director General of the ARU recently spoke at the Conference on Rohingya Ethnic Identity and Basic Rights, where he provided a global perspective on Rohingya political and human rights issues. He gave his insights on the fundamental causes of ethnic cleansing of Rohingya ethnic minority by the government of Burma that has resulted in revocation of their citizenship, annulment of the Rohingya ethnic identity, and major human rights violations against Rohingya. Dr. Udine explained how over 50 years of hostile policy of the government of Burma towards Rohingya people has fed into the cycles of violence by radical Buddhist monks and Rakhine mobs, which has led to the displacement of over 140,000 people in IDP camps in Arakan and over 1 million Rohingya in various parts of the world. He provided accounts of how the ARU has coordinated the global advocacy for the rights of Rohingya with the international community and advanced the causes through the OIC, U.S. government, United Nations General Assembly, Human Rights Commission, European Union, and numerous NGOs. Dr. Udine also explained the U.S. Congress resolution, UN General Assembly resolution, and the UN Special Rapporteur's report and their impacts on the Burmese government's handling of the Rohingya issues. Earlier this week, Dr. Udine met with Deputy Foreign Minister of the United Arab Emirates and provided the details of the new developments in Arakan and Nay Pyi Da. He has highlighted the human rights violations, including the Burmese BGP forces stepping up the arrests of innocent Rohingya, torture, and many other violations. Dr. Udine also explained the series of events that took place in Nay Pyi Da concerning Rohingya white cards, forcing the entire Rohingya population in Arakan into limbo without any documentation. He asked the government of the UAE to use all diplomatic leverage it has with the Burmese government to issue the bona fide citizenship cards like any other ethnic minority in Myanmar. Last Friday, by invitation from the office of the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, Dr. Udine attended the inaugural ceremony of Ambassador-at-Large David Saperstein at the State Department in Washington. In the speech by Secretary Kerry and Ambassador Saperstein, they spoke about the radical Buddhist elements in Burma committing violence against Rohingya and the Muslim population at large, and the denial of citizenship to Rohingya people in their native land. Currently, Dr. Udine is on his way to attend the special conference on anti-terrorism convened by His Majesty King Salman of Saudi Arabia at the Muslim World League headquarters in Saudi Arabia from the 22nd to the 24th of this month. At the conference, World Association of Muslim Youth with ARU and GRC has jointly organized a special session on developing strategies for how to address the Buddhist terror in Arakan and the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya in Burma. Several dignitaries from Muslim countries around the world and from the Saudi Royal Office are expected to attend the Rohingya session. In answering questions posed by Voice of Rohingya Radio, Dr. Udine has emphatically said that the major tasks of the ARU at present are resolving the issue of voting rights for Rohingya, citizenship documentation, and their ethnic identity. Dr. Udine concluded that the ARU will not rest until the Burmese government swallows its own invented word Bengali, mislabeling the Rohingya people, and reinstates their bona fide citizenship with all the rights of a Myanmar citizen. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcast every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Time here in the United States by logging on to vorradio.org, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.